Welcome to the Non-Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Mathias and Daniel.
Hello, everyone. This time we're joined by Dr. Barbara Jane Davy, who is a scholar of religion and ethnography and has been working on gifting rituals among contemporary neo-pagans. So welcome to the show, Barbara.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. For anybody listening, Barbara jumped in last minute, literally, I think, less than 12 hours ago. You agreed to come on as our guest, cancelled on us. So we really, really do appreciate it. And hopefully, the show will go perfect, but just letting people know we haven't had much time to prep, I guess.
Yeah.
That's how it goes sometimes.
Yeah, not that we prep much anyway. We've been winging it for what? Nearly 90 episodes now.
Yeah, there we go. And people seem to like it. I mean, we're already beyond 500,000 downloads in our lifetime. Wow. So we're getting there.
Yeah, somebody's listening. Oh, it's just my mum downloading a lot. She's got a bot. Just a bot running, just downloading the episodes over and over, which I wouldn't put it past my mum, to be honest.
Well, that's nice of her if it's just her.
Hey, those numbers don't lie.
Single-handedly causing the general Huddersfield area's electricity to spike, huh?
Yeah, well, that's it. That's it, absolutely. Yeah, Barbara, how are you? How are things? You are in Canada, which I believe had some quite exciting news in the Viking world, I guess.
Yeah, there was this confirmation that the Vikings were here in Canada at L'Anse Meadows 1,000 years ago. So that was something that people had been pretty sure was the case for a while, but now they were actually able to date that site. I don't know if others might want to say a little bit more about that than I actually know about it, because that's not my area of specialization.
Was that a ball kicked into my field right there?
Definitely, yes.
It's definitely not in my field.
Yeah, so what they have done is that they have used as far as I can see, a solar flare to calibrate. There's a solar flare that happened in the past to calibrate their C14 dating of the site, and have been able to precisely, and I'm not a scientist, so I have no idea how this works. You'll have to look up the study if any of you who are interested in the details. But yes, they've been able to calibrate and figure out exactly when some pieces of wood from that site are from, and that is from the year 1021. So we have precise dating of the presence of some kind of Scandinavian Vikings there in L'Anse Meadows at that particular year. So that's exciting. It is something, as you pointed out, Barbara, this is something that we sort of already knew in terms of, all the other data that we have available. Even the written material seems to place Vikings in the early thousands in L'Anse Meadows, or in Canada, North America, or something somewhere around there. We of course don't have a precise location mentioned in the saga literature as such. So yeah, that is exciting. That is very interesting. And once again, as a literary scholar, I just want to point out that it kind of just tells us that the literature is right.
Well, it seems exciting. I guess, like you said, it's been widely accepted again amongst people who are interested in this world. But I think to the outside world, everybody still gives it to Christopher Columbus. So
yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
I think it hopefully, I don't know how far this news will spread, whether it will just cycle amongst our people, or will it go to like the Muggles, everybody else?
I'm sure that in Canada, people are generally aware of the Scandinavian presence, right?
It's hard to say. Like, definitely in my social circles, people are very much aware of this, but I know a lot of heathens, and the heathens were excited about it. So,
yeah, that's
I saw it, but I think CBC had something on it, which is not quite as dominant as it used to be in Canada.
No, that's kind of my thought, that we're all probably heavily involved with people who are into this kind of stuff. So it's hard to get that perspective of people who aren't, I guess. I have my close friends actually are not into this stuff at all. I'm the only one who kind of is. So I kind of get I wouldn't call it a reality check, but a different perspective when I hang out with them. And this stuff, they have no clue about this. To them, it's just what they learned in school, and it would be Christopher Columbus who discovered America, I guess. So hopefully we can tell everyone that it wasn't.
Go spread the gospel, my friend.
No, I can't go preaching. So, I mean, what do you think it means? Do you think it changes anything, it being confirmed, or is it just a nice thing to happen?
I mean, it doesn't change much, I think. I mean, we're already there where the talking about Europeans discovering North America is a weird, questionable thing. Of course, it was already discovered in the first place by the people who lived
I was
here.
going to say, I'm much more interested in recent archaeological finds that confirm that people have been in North America for more than 10,000 years, more than 14,000 years. That date keeps getting pushed back further and further. I think I saw something just recently about it getting pushed back to 20,000 or 22,000 years.
I was under the impression it was 130,000 years, actually, based off of some carvings that have been located in South America, but this might be my own concoction.
I've come across some of those things, but I've not been able to confirm with academic sources of those. But again, that's not my area of expertise at all. I'm just interested in it.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting, and I think that we're going to see that date of arrival of humans in North and South America in general being pushed back farther and farther, I'm sure, as archaeologists discover more evidence of that. And I'm not surprised at all. I mean, it's a curious idea that human presence would be so quote unquote young in this, pretty much
I think
of the world.
For some people, it supports a narrative of the idea that the indigenous people here don't really have a right to the place because they killed off all the megafauna, just like people did in Europe, basically, which is questionable, to say the least.
That's one of the things that we should consider, that there is and this is not I don't think that that's very obvious to Europeans in general, but a lot of there's a lot of politics involved in the whole idea of like who came when and where and how and all that stuff. Like even the battle between Vikings and Columbus has a white supremacist background from the early 19th century, where you see a lot of self-described white Northern European or whatever they are, Americans being like, oh, we can't have some guy from the Mediterranean discovering America, so therefore let's push the Viking narrative and Eric and all that funky stuff. And that's of course a problematic issue in and of itself. But what we can say in terms of all of this is that there is some. It is interesting to see that there is support for interactions between Northern Europeans and North Americans in that time period, in the first the 11th century. That's what we call it. So yeah, I find that very fascinating.
Do you think that it now being confirmed that it will help funding be granted for people to research maybe how far the quote unquote Vikings went in North America.
I think there's going to get. I mean, it has always been of interest, I think, or at least since the 70s, been of interest, sort of publicly in Canada, and I think there's always going to be some research funding being allocated to figuring out if these people went other places and how they did it and who they talked to and interacted with and all that stuff. And Frederick, keep the Kensington runestone out of this, please.
we will do an episode on that at some point.
We got a troller in the chat.
In the chat.
But no, so I mean that is fascinating in and of itself, and we should expect to find some other locations of interactions. But keep in mind too that this is a huge area. Mm-hmm. And it's very difficult to say much about which direction they went after they created that landing spot in Lonso Meadows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was in Iceland, there's the little museum next to the airport. I can't remember the name of it. Is it Viking World? Is it Viking World? It's aptly named. I think
next to the airport.
Yeah, near the airport there's a little museum.
The local airport in Reykjavik.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, so
the main airport.
The main airport in Keflavik.
Yes.
Which one? The international one? I haven't been to that one.
Yeah,
I tend to try to avoid Viking museums in Iceland. For a lot of reasons.
I like it, so fuck you.
I went when I was there.
Yeah, it is the Viking World. I'm sure it is, and they've got a ship in there that was sailed across Atlantic, I think. I'm sure there was a video suggesting that it was possible to maybe have gone to South America. Now,
really,
I think they will have gone all the way
to South America? I doubt it.
But I wanted to actually ask whether you think that would even be wildly possible for
I mean, it's not impossible. It's not impossible, but isn't
it far more likely that people would have sailed across the Pacific than the Atlantic early on?
I don't think it's far more likely. I think it's just as likely, right? I mean, all the different peoples that were traveling across the Pacific Ocean, they made it pretty far. Pacific is a lot bigger than the
true, but there's more islands that stretch out across the distance, as far as I'm aware.
So, if I remember correctly, there is some evidence of genetic interactions between people in the Peru, Ecuador area. And some of those peoples in the islands, maybe the Easter Islanders, if I'm not mistaken. I might be mistaken on this one, but if that's the case, then of course we have peoples who have been traveling across, and I mean, I'm not surprised at that at all. I mean, these people are master navigators and great boat builders, so of course they would be able to do that. Just because we Europeans sort of like came late to that thing, and it doesn't mean that other people weren't capable of doing it before.
No, I think the idea was that they settled North America and then would have, I guess, naturally wanted to follow the coastline down, and obviously get maybe travel down and get to South America. But even it would be interesting if they didn't get as far as South America. You would assume if they made a settlement in North America, Canada way, that they would have at least maybe explored a little bit.
Well, what is it? There is like a particular type of nut that was found in the Lonso Meadows site that grow farther south. It doesn't get as far up north as where Lonso Meadows is, as far as I remember. So that means that they probably went down there. That's also that has been used to sort of suggestively indicate that that the idea that they found grapes was right, true, because those nuts, I can't remember what they're called. They grow at the same latitude as grapes. But
yeah, I think I remember that
again,
from
it's
this.
kind of speculative because it could also be traded, you know.
Yeah, there's lots of things that appear further north than they grew because of trade.
Yeah, I think I remember that might be part of the documentary as well. Now you said that, because is North USA known for vines? Maybe
Not really.
no. I'm probably remembering it wrong.
I mean, no. I guess you got to get relatively far south to find that. I don't know. I mean, to me, all this is skewed too, because most of the US is actually much farther south compared to where I'm from, like Scandinavia. So it's weird, but they have snow anyway. And like my conceptual idea of snow is that it stops somewhere around the UK. Okay. So it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But that's just me and geography.
No, I think it would make sense that if there was a settlement in North America, that they may have explored a little bit, but that doesn't necessarily mean they had to settle anywhere else. But certainly maybe just go and have a look, see what's out there.
There's definitely grapes that grow around the Great Lakes region. Like there's lots of wineries now that are established around Niagara, Beamsville. That's where my family is from a generation back. And now there's also on this side of the lake, closer to where I am in Prince Edward County now, there's grape growing established. And this is using European varieties now they've established that can grow in these areas. That's not what was growing there at the time, but there were grapes. There were wild grapes, even that grow here in Ottawa, which is a bunch further north than around like the Great Lakes region.
Now you're giving the Kensington Runestone people ammunition.
So
have a go down.
But those grapes don't make good wine.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for anybody listening, the reason we're talking about grapes is because they named, I guess it's in the literature, they named the land Vineland. So,
which can also mean meadowland. So there's something going on there. It can mean both wine or meadow, and depending on how you spell it. And orthography wasn't standardized when they wrote the sagas. So this is the main argument that saga scholars have had for about a century and a half. Did they spell it with a dot or a little stroke above the eye?
This is actually one of the first things that ever caught my attention as a child about Vikings, was this idea of Vineland or Vinland, because the town where I lived as a young child in Ontario is called Vineland.
Oh, cool.
It's not too far from Toronto. It's about an hour's drive from Toronto. Right on Lake Ontario.
Oh, cool. I think for me, what got me interested was giant axes and all the killing, but I was just I say young boy. I was probably like 22. So let's talk about the sorry, I was just looking at in the chat and someone was saying the Kensington Rune Story is true. Oh, was it Frederick again? And it put me off. Yeah, let's talk about the main body of the episode, which is gifting in, I guess, modern heathenry, which I'm going to be honest, I don't know what that is. And so I think if you could just explain that, I guess first would be a good place to start.
Okay. So I did a PhD recently on heathens, looking at inclusive heathens in Canada. And I was interested in ritual practices and how ritual practices might support the development of an environmental ethic. So how do ritual practices actually get people to act in a particular pro-environmental way? This idea has been around for a long time, that ritual somehow inculcates ethics. This is something that's been an idea put forth by Emil Durkheim early on in sociology. But there's not been a really good understanding of how does that happen. So I wanted to do an ethnographic study, actually participate in rituals and see, well, what happens? What is going on there? And some of the rituals that I participated in when I started this research were things like the sumbel ritual, the ritual of sharing drinks together, making toasts, and also sometimes giving gifts. In the particular community that I was studying in Ontario, people hold this annual festival called Hail and Horn Gathering. And part of that gathering is what they call high sumbel, where there is a gathering of people. They have a bloat, which is what people would often say is the main heathen ritual, but sumbel, arguably, I would say, is just as important, if not more important, of making toasts. Sometimes it's just raising a glass, speaking words over the horn. You can toast gods, you can toast ancestors, and you can toast the people who are present. And at Hail and Horn, they have two different rounds. The first one, you just make toasts. The second one, you give gifts. So it's something a little bit more than just giving a toast, where you also give some sort of a gift. Sometimes it's a small token, like it might be like some, I don't know, like I gave somebody a healing balm to just say thank you for what they do for the community, and a reminder to look after yourself too. Or it might be some really emotionally heavy gift, like a wolf pelt or something like this, which is expensive for one thing, but also has a lot of meaning behind it. So I was interested, well, what is happening when people are giving these kinds of gifts? Well, what happens in general when you give a gift? It often makes you feel like you need to do something back. It develops reciprocity. And this is actually an idea which is very important in contemporary heathenry within Canada anyway.
Yeah, I think it depends maybe on the person as well. I probably get more enjoyment out of giving gifts than receiving gifts. I always have done. I tend to go over the top when it comes to Christmas. So a lot of people probably want to be on my present list. But I do get some enjoyment out of it when I give somebody something maybe that they weren't expecting, or it's something that they need. I get very much a sense of self-gratification, I guess, from that. It makes me happy to see them happy, whereas obviously I like getting gifts, but I certainly do like the giving part.
Yeah, well, this is something I found interesting talking to people about this gifting process of what is meaningful to people is the giving of the gift. And they very often perceive it as a giving back for something that the person has done for them personally or for the community more broadly. So it's a way of saying thank you. It's given for something that they have already received. So it's not a gift that's usually given with an expectation that you're going to get something back from the person. It's usually more of an indirect kind of thing. And I think this is actually what creates a strong community overall.
I would say that's quite interesting, because I think certainly if you take like Christmas, for example, that always seems to be, especially maybe, I guess, amongst friends, but certainly amongst couples, that it has to be almost equal. Like we'll spend the same amount, and what I give you has to be of equal value of what I get back. It seems to be very much kind of that idea of giving and receiving equally.
Yeah, and I think this is something that it's an idea that comes from a transactional economy where we are accustomed to, you pay money for something and it's supposed to be equal to what you pay for, the thing that you're buying. And it's a relationship which is set up to be cut off at the end of the exchange. It doesn't allow any ongoing social ties. Whereas if you look at gifting economies, the way that you maintain relations between people and between groups is you have these overlapping cycles of giving gifts where there's a gift given and there's a social obligation attached to it. And it's not reciprocated immediately, sometimes not directly.
Mm-hmm.
But the relationship is not over when you give the gift.
Maybe that's what I'm doing when I give people good gifts. I'm just in the back of my mind thinking, in a few years when I need something, I'm going to remind you of this. Yeah, I'm sure that must be part of it, especially back. I know we're talking more contemporary, but in the Viking age, I'm assuming gifting will have been just as important, well, more important to getting the sway of people and getting people on your side. And if you want to put an army together, I guess some gifts are given. So, I think, yeah, it's definitely an important thing for kind of making social ties.
If we want to sort of like get historically critical about contemporary pagans and what they do and such things, I think one of the things that seems most in line with historical pre-Christian culture in Northern Europe is this giving process. We can identify a pattern of gift giving to establish alliances, for instance, between elite individuals and families, all the way back to the height of what in Northern Europe is known as the Germanic Iron Age, so post-Roman influence, and so that's really interesting to see that the proliferation of certain artifacts with certain type of art on it basically reflects sort of a Northern European gift-giving process back and forth to establish alliances. Now, the interesting thing is also that it looks like the thing that disrupts this is actually Christianity. So, so all of a sudden, the elite in Scandinavia is cut off from the elite that they were otherwise connected to in Central and Western Europe. So I think it's really fascinating as a phenomenon, and I know this in terms of my own relationship to heathen groups and out there. I know this phenomenon as one of the older phenomenons too. Gift giving is something that I recognize all the way back to the 90s at least. So I wonder how it even started. Do you have any sort of like historical information for us on where this phenomenon comes from and why it is so significant?
I don't have data that will actually support anything. I just have so-and-so says so-and-so, like that would at least put it back to the 80s and people reading sources like Paul Bochat's The Well and the Tree, where he talks about Sumbel and this has been used as a model for how Sumbel should be conducted, and supplemented with later sources now, like Stephen Pollington's book, The Mead Hall, things like this. But those practices were starting to be developed in the United States and passed on to people in Canada, at least by the 80s, as far as I'm aware. The Pollington book, like I said, is later, but the Bochat's one is from 1982, I think.
That's right. Yeah, 82.
And then there's other sources that are earlier than that talk about the importance of ceremonial drinking and passing the mead cup, like Michael Enright's The Lady with the Mead Cup and things like this, that have traced that kind of practice of shared drinks. And people will point to also the Heimskringla, where people have talked more about the bloat practices associated with that, of the requirement to give an offering, and how the king of Norway had to eat a piece of horse liver to maintain his relationship with the people that he was trying to govern. But in that same text, it also talks about how passing the toasts across the fire was also part of that required ritual, essentially, of sharing food and drink together and passing the horn.
Yeah, I think, I mean, Mathias, you'll know better than me whether, what do we know, like, accurately when it comes to the Viking Age, when it comes to rituals like this? Were they popular, or is it much more of a modern phenomenon?
The drinking ritual,
well,
historical phenomenon,
I guess
seems to be very old. Very old. One of the things that you can see in what do you call that? Roman Iron Age is the term that I have decided to use for it. So the time period where the Roman Empire starts influencing Scandinavia materially and also culturally in different ways. We see one of the first things that they seem to be really thrilled about in southern Scandinavia, and especially in the Danish area, is where we have found most evidence of interaction with the Roman area, is of course drinking vessels. And they seem to, I have a personal theory. We talked a little bit with Terry Gunnell about it, and that's where Terry was like, orgies? What are you talking about? I have, my personal theory is that it looks like these rulers in certain locations, like Tryggevelde in southern Denmark, or southeastern Denmark, they picked up on the Dionysian rituals and were totally down with this ritual sharing of the bowl full of some kind of intoxicating drink. I'm sure they started importing wine at that time, and I am also personally quite convinced that this is a ritual that persists, because there are so many sources that in one way or another hints at drinking rituals, and they don't go away with Christianity either. They just, take on more of a secular. Yeah, they get transformed, right?
Like we still do wedding toasts.
Exactly, yeah. So it's sort of like a phenomenon that just seems to persist. And if it didn't exist before Roman influence on Northern Europe, then it definitely comes in those first centuries AD, if you ask me. I'm also kind of convinced that they probably existed before then, but they take on new forms again with the Roman influence.
Yeah, I think you can trace it further back in Europe also, just with early gathering sites. Like people have looked at beer brewing specifically in a longer trajectory.
Yeah, and also, I mean, mead as a type of alcohol is presumably one of the oldest types of alcohol that we know of. It's pretty easy to make also, so that's something that we know has existed in Europe and Northern Europe for a very, very long time.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why drinking toasts or rituals would be a thing. I mean, anybody I think most people have probably been maybe on a night out or had drinks with people that they don't know. Maybe it's a friend gathering and there's somebody new in the group, and you do feel a lot closer when you've been on a night out drinking, and kind of everybody gets on a little bit more, loosens inhibitions, everybody talks a little bit more, I guess, and you do feel closer by the end of it, even if it's just after one night. You certainly feel more like friends, I guess. Is that Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I've definitely had that kind of experience before, but I do feel like I should insert a statement here about drink responsibly. And heathen drinking is not just about socially getting drunk. When people make toasts in Sambal, they share deeply emotive things. Like at Hale and Horn, a lot of people cry during this process, men and women. And it's not because they're getting drunk and maudlin or whatever, it's because they are expressing deeply important things about each other in a public setting. And it's important that it's witnessed, because the perception is that these words that are spoken over the horn are deposited into the well of Wyrd. So this is why if you make an oath in that context, you are expected to do what you say because you've said that into Wyrd. It's got to happen. And the people who are present need to help you make that happen. So actually at Hale and Horn, it's strongly discouraged that you make oaths, because we don't want to bind everybody there. This is a wider setting than just a personal gathering of a kindred or whatever. Like it's not just a small group of people. It can be up to 100 people sitting around a campfire doing this in that particular context, because this is a fairly large heathen festival. It draws people from across Ontario and Quebec, as well as from further afield in Canada. We often have people coming from BC or Calgary or whatever. There'll always be a few people from elsewhere. There are a few people from the United States who regularly come up also.
I mean, even in that setting, I think maybe even more so, you can see why you would break down boundaries. I guess the alcohol will definitely help a little bit, but if you're in a situation where other people are being open and honest, you tend to maybe let yourself be more, especially when there's no judgment. And I guess whoever goes first has to set the example. But once you realize people aren't going to snigger at you and laugh at you, then it's easier to be yourself, I guess, and say what you want to say and kind of open up.
Yeah, I can't imagine that people would ever snigger, as you say, at something somebody says in that context. It's
no, I mean,
for one thing, it's the most accepting group of people I've probably ever encountered in my life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, but I'm sure that people still internally, even in a setting like that, you would still, if you're open up, especially about something maybe it's personal, you would still have that fear that maybe someone was going to judge you. I think that's just a very natural thing to have. So once you see how accepting it is, then it would certainly make it easier to share. Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing, kind of showing your feelings. I mean, yeah, I try not to very often.
This is something that I do see in other ritual contexts within heathenry, though. Certainly the inclusive heathens that I'm familiar with in Ontario from my study, in Bloat also, people totally speak from the heart when they are giving offerings to deities within a Bloat setting, a formal ritual. It's very emotional. People talk about their relationship with the deity. And again, a lot of times people cry. I'm a big crier, so I always cry.
I'm a big crier. I'm a big softie inside. I might not look it, but I am. No, I mean, I can only speak from how I would be. I mean, I've never been to a ritual like that, but I assume that if I was put in a position where I had to kind of open up, and I mean, maybe that's not the right phrase, because I assume it wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to. It's not something forced. But certainly, if I was there, I would want to partake. I would want to take part in it. But I also would be very self-conscious, I guess, which I guess the alcohol would help. But I would be self-conscious of kind of saying whatever I wanted to say, and I think that would just be, maybe most people might feel like that until they're there and they're a little bit more comfortable. I don't know. I just feel it would.
Yeah, and some people aren't comfortable talking in a group.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very much encouraged in the rituals that I've participated in. People are invited to make personal offerings as part of bloat, and they often do speak, but it is usually stated by the people who are leading the ritual that you don't have to talk out loud. You can just silently do whatever. So some people choose to do that, but even people who otherwise don't tend to speak up in groups often do share words at that time. And it makes it, I think, even more special.
Yeah, absolutely. Imagine that it is a very, I'm trying to think of the right word for it. Just, I guess, like almost a magical moment when everybody feels connected. Everybody's listening to each other, which is also very important. And then being able to have your own time, I guess, to speak and say what you want to say. And that doesn't happen very often in life, I don't think. I don't think we get much time to where people truly listen. Obviously, we do the podcast, and once a week we get to sit down and actually speak to people and listen. And there's no distractions. I don't have my phone. Mathias doesn't have the guest. So we're stuck in a conversation for an hour and a half. But in normal life, I don't think that happens anymore. Or certainly not in my life, because I'm just rushing around doing whatever I have to do. And I guess it's probably the same for Mathias.
You're right. It doesn't happen that often. You just sit down and you talk with people and share thoughts and ideas and all those things. That I hadn't really realized that, but yeah, it is something that's like slowly just like evaporized from my life, so to speak.
I think it's a skill as well. I think anybody.
I think you have to make time for it.
Well, yeah, but you also have to have somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you haven't cultivated or haven't had time to cultivate relationships to people in that way, and then it doesn't happen. And I don't know if I'm going to offend Americans here, but guys, it's not like you can sit down and have a very focused conversation with a lot of people in this country. Let's just say it that way.
I think no, I think even people who are in relationships, there's one thing having conversation when you're maybe in the car driving a 10-minute journey, or talking about what you're going to have for tea, or something very menial like that. But it's another thing, like you said, Barbara, you have to make the time to sit and maybe block out half an hour where you actually have a conversation about things other than the direct things that are happening in life. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's definitely been neglectful of that in my life. I don't do that. I'm so busy trying to run a business, do the podcast, organize this, organize that, that when me and Sarah, most things we talk about are just things that are happening in daily life, not an actual timed conversation. And I think conversation is certainly a skill that if you don't do it, you almost forget how to do it. Doing the podcast for so many shows, I'm sure people who listen to this will see such a difference when me and Mathias started to us now, and how we're able to just have easy conversations with people. And because it's not an easy thing without it sometimes feeling awkward or coming across awkward, because when you don't do it all the time, you kind of forget how to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
there's
you
also
definitely have to
a
train
stage
it.
of life thing that happens to a lot of us where we maybe find more time to spend with friends when we're in our teens or 20s or whatever. And then as you get more adult responsibilities, whether it's just through jobs or through having children or whatever, I know that it was definitely an experience for me that after I had a child, I just did not have the same time to devote to maintaining friendships.
Mm-hmm.
But now my child is older and I have more time to do some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely worthwhile to put the effort in now.
Yeah. Small children will definitely destroy your social life.
Well, it changes it.
Yeah, that's another way to put it, I guess. It's the same with buying a new house. I feel like I constantly have something to do. Or getting a car. It's like, okay, so now I need to go get maintenance. Now I need to go get new tires. There's this and there's that, and there's like always something. So all those things compounding, and then you don't have time for anything at all. And there you go.
When you have kids, though, it is a way to meet people if you move to a new place.
Yes,
because
of course,
you will be forced to talk to other people because your children do things, and you have to talk to the other parents.
That is correct. Unless, of course, that new place is deep in the woods.
Do you think that no matter what, you'll always find something to take your time, whether it was a new house, a new car, children, a puppy, there'll always be something if you let there be something. It's about making that conscious effort to, I guess, see people. I know sometimes it's not possible, but there usually is a way if you want to. But it's easy to kind of go, okay, I want to do this, or this is a little bit more important or interesting right now, rather than just like, okay, because I guess sitting down and having a conversation with someone for an hour doesn't always seem like the most productive thing you can do with your time. In the moment, you can always be, I'm sure there's always something where you can be like, I can do this, or in this hour I could be doing this instead. Whereas in the end, I think that it's very rewarding. I know when we do the podcast every week, by the time we're done, I certainly feel very rewarded from it. I've learned something. I feel like I've practiced some skills that I don't do every day. I think everyone just needs to take a little bit more time to speak to each other. Mm-hmm. And I think, like Shance just said in the chat about sort of capitalism and the way we are now and how everything's set up, that we're all, we speak to more people maybe online, we just don't talk to our neighbors. We don't have that sense of face-to-face community, I guess, that we used to have.
I mean, it goes back to the idea that everything is transactional, right? Late stage capitalism is based on the idea that everything needs to be a transaction. Mm-hmm. Everything needs to be something that we all gain revenue from, and that's really problematic in and of itself. So,
yeah, and I know a lot of people have experienced during the pandemic the loss of social contact, which has been very challenging for people's mental health. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I came across was looking at even face-to-face interactions with people in your neighborhood that you don't really know, like a shopkeeper where you go and buy, I don't know, where you go buy milk or whatever. I was going to say newspaper, but nobody buys newspapers anymore. But even just a brief social interaction like that face-to-face, it is dramatically better for people. It really improves your health mm-hmm. overall, not just your mental health, but you'll actually live longer if you engage in these kinds of things, because we need those kinds of relationships.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're human beings, and we're I think we thrive on that, and it's so easy to not go out and talk to people now, like you say, especially over the last couple of years with people being locked up inside. But I certainly feel better seeing people. And again, I think it's as much with the conversation, it's a skill. And if you keep yourself away from people and stay in and just do your own thing, the more you do it, the more maybe anxious and worried you will be to then go outside. So it's almost a catch-22, because it becomes more damning the longer you don't do it, so you don't want to do it. But certainly, seeing people and just being around other humans is good for us.
Yeah, and it helps support community development, which I'm thinking about other parts of my research about good ways to promote pro-environmental behavior, because this is the kind of work I've been doing most recently, is focusing on, well, how do environmental values get propagated? And one of the best ways for getting action is through groups that meet face-to-face frequently.
Mm-hmm.
It actually is really important. So religious communities are pre-existing groups which can be very effective because they already have this sense of community. They meet together regularly.
Well, one thing I just I wanted to ask you about, it just can backtrack a little bit to this aspect of doing things that are should be natural to our existence. So if contemporary pagans have these types of rituals where they essentially cultivate a natural interaction, is there then some truth to the claims that heathens try to sort of like go back to a more natural state that you sometimes see among these groups? So that, we're trying to cultivate a more natural state of existence for human beings. Would you say that we're succeeding in that situation then, or is it
well, is
that too far of a reach?
I think that's going to depend very much on the specific community that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. I definitely see that sort of thing happening in the heathen groups that I'm involved with. Mm-hmm. I also see that happening in things like my sister's Christian group that she belongs to. My parents were heavily involved in their church for many, many years. And again, that was a healthy community that was supporting what I would see as natural human relationships. So I wouldn't say it's anything unique to heathenry, but the particular group of heathens or groups of heathens that I'm involved with, there are people who are consciously trying to build positive social relationships and make the world a better place. Like that, it matters if people are trying to do this kind of thing rather than just being adopting an identity because they like something about it and wanting to just be that thing. Like it's not just about being heathen, it's about creating a community together.
Mm-hmm. And the underlying sort of theological premise for this is the notion that Wyrd ties everyone and everything together.
Yeah, and I wanted to say something more specifically about how that involves the natural world, because I've talked about it in human relations quite a bit, starting with symbol rituals. But I also wanted to talk about other kinds of gifting rituals within heathenry, namely making offerings, because when we give an offering, that is also giving a gift. And there's that same expectation of there being social bonds that are maintained through those giving of gifts. So sometimes people will talk about this in a very direct transactional kind of way. Like they'll talk about, I give so that you can give. And they will interpret that as a direct reciprocity of, I'm giving this offering to the gods so that the gods will give me something. Mm-hmm. But some heathens interpret that somewhat differently. They'll say, I'm giving something to this deity so that they are able to give And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to give something back to them. It might mean that they will give something to somebody else who needs it. Like if I give an offering to the goddess Air, who in this heathen tradition is interpreted as a goddess of healing, I don't particularly need that for myself. But if I give an offering to Air, then I might hope that something is available to somebody else from Air because I gave this gift. Similarly, if I give an offering to a land fatir, like a power of nature, I'm not expecting to get something directly back from that. But I do very much feel that I am in a gifting relationship with the natural world. Mm-hmm. I breathe air that plants breathe out for me to breathe. We have this ongoing, totally interdependent relationship with plants that we usually completely forget about. Mm-hmm. I think it's useful to recognize those kinds of relationships in a ritual context so that we bring them to mind and we appreciate them. We experience that feeling of gratitude for these kinds of relationships. And I see this happening also with some heathen practices of bloat, where sometimes people offer animals even. I know this is a bit of a controversial subject more generally within contemporary heathen practice, but some heathens do offer animals. And it's generally very important to the people involved that that animal has a good life. So it's not just you go and buy a piece of meat at the grocery store and offer it to the gods. No, you raise an animal or you acquire one that has been raised ethically for that purpose. And then you offer that animal and you share its flesh together in community.
I think that's what's important. As long as you eat it and use the hide and use as much as you can. What's the difference of it being killed in an offering or being killed at the slaughterhouse? There isn't one.
Well, sometimes I would say it's better to be killed in the ritual because it's done carefully, respectfully, humanely.
But I think
that's maybe not always the case in a slaughterhouse.
No, absolutely not. I think going back to, as you mentioned earlier about outsiders, if they saw a bunch of heathens or what they would see as kind of like, they'd probably link it to some sort of devil worshipping as well. But if they saw a bunch of heathens in the woods sacrificing an animal, they would be outcry. It would be cruelty. Like I have no doubt that it would be linked to devil worshipping in some way, but it would be seen very, very negatively. To especially, like I say, certainly to outsiders, to people who aren't into this kind of thing, there would be no way that you could kind of explain it as being a good thing. Even when you go down to it and look at it, the animal probably had a better life. It was probably killed in a more humane way. Its flesh was probably appreciated more, and everything was probably used. But to the outside world, I can't imagine it would be ever looked upon favorably.
It's kind of interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. I think with a lot of people, it tends to be out of sight, out of mind. And when it goes on in a slaughterhouse, you don't see it. Your meat just turns up at the supermarket in a nice little plastic package with a cellophane wrap over the top, and it doesn't resemble what it is. And they just like to not think about where it actually comes from. Whereas if you witness the animal being killed, then it suddenly becomes barbaric and very real. Now, I had the unpleasure of having to do some plumbing work when I was a plumber before I started the business, and we did some plumbing work in an abattoir, and they didn't stop for us being there. So I've seen firsthand kind of the handlings of the abattoir, and they're not nice places. Certainly, this one wasn't. There was a guy at the back of all the cows trying to get them down the little chute with his cattle prod, just shocking the one at the back because trying to push it forward, even though it can't go anywhere because the rest of them clearly don't want to go in there because they know what's happening. They're very sad, dark places that you don't see. But again, it's kind of that out of sight mentality that a lot of people have.
Yeah, but arguably, if we are going to eat meat, then we should be aware of what's happening. And I think offering animals in bloat is a way to remind people of that more often, and make them think about, well, where does my food come from?
You know, I agree with that. And we've talked about this on the podcast before with Arctic hunting and slaughtering practices. And for instance, what we sometimes see are people who react very strongly to the Faroese porpoise hunt, which gets really bloody in the water. I remember Heidi Jonsson from Tuyr, who said that, well, the argument for continuing this practice is that these animals, they live free range in the ocean, and then some of them, and there are thousands of them, some of them get slaughtered in this hunt. It looks cruel or gruesome or something like that, but it's nothing compared to raising a cow or a pig in one of those huge pens where they can exchange a bunch of antibiotic resistant bacteria, and then live a really sorry life and get slaughtered in a really unpleasant way, and then contribute to just generally making everybody ill in the end, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Factory farming is something that I could have a big rant about.
Yes, right. Very long one.
I know. Before I started Horns, I was big into comics, and I wrote a couple, and one was on factory farming. So I did a bunch of research on it, and I don't think there's a worse crime committed by humans than factory farming. It is abhorrent what
Except
they
what
do.
we do to each other, of course.
Yeah.
But even then, because I think there's more animals in factory farming killed every year than there are people on the planet. It's the sheer numbers of animals in factory farm is outstanding. It is billions, and the thing, just the life that they give them is just worse than any life they could give to anything. But again, they use, is it ADGAB laws, whatever, basically where the whole silencing laws where you can't speak. So basically, if you go in there, whatever you see in there, you can't say anywhere because you're just going to get sued to death.
And over here you can get like several years in prison for videotaping and those kinds of things in those facilities, and it's horrible. It's really horrible.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not nice. It's something I certainly feel pretty passionate about. I don't like it at all. But yeah, it's a bit of a sad subject. Let's get back to let's get back to gifting.
A nice cozy part of things.
Yeah.
One of the other kinds of gifting that I look at is specifically giving to ancestors.
Okay.
And I found this was far more important to heathens than I expected. Because I was coming into an environmental studies program, I was expecting, partly from my background in studying religion and ecology too, people often talk about, well, if divinity is immanent or found within nature, then that should help people protect it, right? So I was expecting I was going to be focusing on things like what people would call genius loci, or spirits of nature, or in heathens, they would often talk about them as landvitir, or spirits of the land. I don't like that term spirits terribly much because in practice, often these things are not thought of as disembodied in any way. It's the things themselves. But the offerings given to ancestors actually support an environmental ethic, I find. Partly because if you are giving offerings to your ancestors, it helps expand your moral community. First of all, it expands your sense of imagined community, goes further back in time because you're imagining who your ancestors were further back. It also gives you a sense of obligation to future generations, often because the easiest way for you to give back to your ancestors is to, in fact, pass on things to your descendants. Mm-hmm. But also within heathen tradition, particularly as is practiced at Raven's Knoll, that's that campground that hosts the Hail and Horn gathering, heathens there told me about how there's this practice within Northern European history that heathens try to emulate of, you go out and you give offerings on the ancestors' mound or where the ancestors are buried. And over time, people would forget the names of the people who were buried further back. So you just have this collective sense of ancestors. And in North America, people tend to refer to them as Alfar or as Desir, if it's female relatives in particular. I know those terms have sort of disputed meanings or interpretations over history. And if people study Norse literature, then they're going to have a different sense of what those terms should mean. But in practice, in North America, often this is how these terms are used. As Desir refers to female ancestors, Alfar refers to male ancestors. In a collective sense, if we don't know their names anymore. So if people are giving offerings to these entities, what happened over time was eventually they get transformed into elves or to gnomes. Like people's perception of who is receiving those offerings over time changes. So there's a continuity between giving offerings to ancestors and just giving offerings to what might be perceived as nature spirits or powers of the land, regenerative powers of the land, things like this. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the really valuable things about ancestor veneration is this broadening of who is part of the dead, who is given offerings, who are we in gifting relationships with.
This is a really interesting interpretation or understanding of the meaningfulness of ancestor spirits, because I have encountered, especially in Europe, a lot of mixed with anti-North American sentiments. I think also the rejection of ancestor veneration in any form. And I also see it among some, I guess you could call them groups that are pretty far left here in the US, because it's associated with the far right. The idea that, oh, you venerate your ancestors because you're basically some kind of racist or something like that, right?
Yeah, so I've written about that also. And mm-hmm. I hope I have an article coming out on that soon. It's under review right now. Mm-hmm. But within these inclusive heathens that I've studied and that I am part of these groups, I am myself heathen, there's a recognition that, a focus on ancestry, that can be really problematic. It can be quite exclusionary if people are talking about my white ancestors and they frame things in that way. Mm-hmm. The groups that I'm part of course, are not exclusive in that way. For one thing, they welcome people of whatever background to participate in their meetings, but they also don't just refer to ancestors as people who are biologically related to them. There are also ancestors of affinity. That's a term that comes from Daniel Foor's work on ancestral medicine, mm-hmm. where these are cultural ancestors that are also celebrated. So within the kindred that I belong to, or at least the first kindred that I joined, I still belong to it, but I also belong to another one now since I moved recently. Within Vindasir kindred in southwestern Ontario, the ancestors that are venerated are not just people's relatives that they can name, but also people like Sylvia Rivera, Marsha P. Johnson, who are specifically trans women who were important in the early gay rights movement in the United States. So those are not people that we are genetically related to, but are people that we want to celebrate and that we do make offerings to. Mm-hmm. So in other kindreds locally here too, there are people who are venerated as ancestors who are not genetic relations. And then there's also ancestors of place that are recognized. So in North America in particular, very often the people who are participating in these heathen things have European ancestry, are settlers, but they want to recognize the indigenous people whose land they live on. So for instance, here in Ottawa, I would give a land recognition or a land acknowledgement if I were to start doing a ritual here, where I would say, I am on unceded territory of Anishinaabe people, Algonquin people, and make an offering. This is something that's usually done at Raven's Knoll also. People will offer tobacco at the start of an event and recognize the ancestors of the land. So ancestry in this context is not about any kind of pride in ancestry or pride in some constructed identity of whiteness. That's not what it's about. It's much more inclusive than that.
Mm. Yeah, I think I recognize similar concepts from Scandinavia. Of course, a lot of it is actually mixed up with the formation of the nation states and so on. So, for instance, go to Iceland and you can see Ingólfur Arnason, the first settler of Iceland, being sort of a communal ancestor, right? And you can see similar things elsewhere in Europe, for better or worse, I guess. Yeah, that's very interesting, dude. From a scholarly point of view, I'm actually quite excited to hear about this.
No, I think we have to be careful not vilifying people being able to be pride. I don't like the word pride, but talking to their ancestors just because they happen to be white, I guess. And I think we're in that kind of uneasy position at the minute where it is almost vilified, and you could be very inclusive, but it's almost seen as nobody could ever say, "Oh, you've got to be very tough to be proud." When you use the word pride, especially, it becomes very negative because there are people who, I guess, ruin it. So people then feel that they can't show any sort of happiness or look back to their ancestors, and I think you have to be careful to stop that, because you can still be proud of where you come from and also be inclusive to everybody else and want everybody else to enjoy it as well. It doesn't have to, I don't think
it matters how you do it, though.
Absolutely
it matters if you are uncritical, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So
Absolutely.
I find it interesting that when people venerate their ancestors within heathen groups here, they will celebrate things that they are proud of in their ancestry, like giving offerings to people who served in the military, for instance. But they also are cautious to recognize that not everything about their ancestry is something to be proud of. This is something that within the groups that I'm part of is a sort of a delicate topic, because people have often mixed ancestry. So people will sometimes have some settler background, but also some indigenous background. Like there's a number of people involved in heathenry at Raven's Knoll, for instance, who have some indigenous ancestry. So they want to recognize that ancestry without thereby claiming an identity as indigenous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's quite sad that people have to be so fearful, especially when it's in a particular, just an innocent way of being proud of ancestry, because there is this negative connotation that kind of just attaches itself so easily.
Well, I think the problem is that
people.
Sometimes it's really not an innocent
absolutely
pride.
not. No, absolutely not. I completely agree. But I think it's very sad that because there is that negativity from certain groups, that it then prevents people being able to do it in an innocent way, because they're of the fear of automatically being labeled in a certain way. I mean, I personally don't kind of understand the whole ancestry pride thing. It's not something that I've never kind of been that whole part of that whole group. I don't feel this giant pride to be English or from Yorkshire. I guess it's just, for me, it's just kind of like a label. But some people do kind of.
Wait, you don't have a Chevy England tattoo anywhere?
No, I don't. But some people find it very, they're very much proud of the country. I know it's very much is a thing in the USA. It's very much that national pride very much exists. Whereas I've kind of, I guess, never really felt that. I just think we have to be careful going too far one way or the other, where people shouldn't be fearful of being proud of where they come from, because absolutely there's negative things in the past. I think you could look at any group of peoples on Earth that doesn't have some form of negativity in the past. So I think you have to be careful not allowing people to be proud of where they come from, because there are some groups of people who are cunts who just try to ruin it for everybody else.
I think one of the things that complicates the situation for people here in North America is that a lot of these things are still being negotiated. This situation has not been resolved. Like, so, for instance, take the now that we have Frederick being so Swedish in our chat. So let me just shit on the Swedes for a second, because I'm Danish. No, the situation is right that the Denmark and Sweden, for instance, they're historically some of the two nations on the planet that have been most at war. And capturing territory from each other and all of these things, right? There's a lot of things that you could bring up. No, actually, I felt like you didn't won most of the wars. You didn't won the see now it starts. You did not won the Great Nordic War. For some reason, our idiot king just ceded territory to you anyway. Anyway, coming back to the situation is, of course, then that you can get in a lot of arguments over that, and you can you can start questioning who belongs on what territories and all of those things. But ultimately, these are issues that have been settled between these two peoples, and now we can make fun of it, and that's what we do in different ways. We have fun little arguments over them, but that's not at all the situation in the Americas. The very little has actually been settled, and it's also been very hard, I think, for people to figure out how to settle it properly, and figure out how to mend those wounds of the past, right? And so
context matters a great deal.
A lot, right?
Like in Canada, we've been recently finding the bodies of Aboriginal children from residential schools. This is very much on people's minds. That's a relationship that we need to work on.
Mm-hmm. And we haven't here for. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, people are aware that we need to work on that.
Yeah, and here in the U.S., we haven't found that many of such sites, and that's because we aren't looking. Right. So that also tells you a little bit about the situation here. So that, I think, it's a really good example, right, of all the things that need to be worked through. So that, of course, also changes things up compared to Europe and the notions of pride and ancestry and what a location actually is, right? Because I don't think that there's a lot of people who are questioning that the location that you're sitting in, Dan, is known as England. I don't know, maybe some crazy Viking somewhere, a Viking bro from Norway or Denmark. But aside from that, right? And this is an entirely different situation over here.
Yeah, I just think we have to be very, very careful with how and where we go with things, because we spoke about this on the podcast a lot, and it's how much do you sacrifice because of twats who try and take things and use them for their own nefarious ways. Like, how much do you give before you lose the majority of what you love, or the ability to talk about it openly in public because it's seen negatively by people who are outsiders? Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. There's so many people in this community that we surround ourselves that understand on a deeper knowledge that the Valknut isn't a racist symbol, or that the Milner isn't a racist symbol. But it's what people see on Facebook, on Instagram, that the outsiders that make up the majority of the world who see these things and see them in a negative light, and they associate them in all matters. I have like Lloyd, who owns Valhalla Training Academy. He has a flag on the wall. It's a tattoo by the guy who runs Razor, tattoo on a piece of art from the guy who runs Razor Storm, and he has a Valknut on the back of the hand of one of the tattoos. Somebody messaged him asking him if he was a white supremacist Jim, and it's these people on the outside that see these symbols and just assume. And I think that's why I think we have to be careful on how much you're willing to give because until you just lose of what you love.
My perception of this is that it's not by insisting on being able to talk about pride and ancestry. It's more about saying, I wear this symbol. Like I do. I wear a Mjolnir. And I'm also inclusive. I think it's far more important that we state those kinds of positive things of, I am heathen, for instance, and I am inclusive. I'm not going to tell people that they can't practice this religion because of the color of their skin. I think that's stupid, basically.
Oh, absolutely.
So if we don't want to allow racist people or far right people or whatever to be able to own these symbols, we have to ourselves use them and say otherwise.
Yeah, no, that I completely agree with that, and I think that's also the sentiment that you're trying to bring forth, Dan. That we have to push back and use them. I mean, I have the Valknut tattooed on my arm, and I'm inclusive and heathen.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, you have to push back. We talk about regularly on the podcast and try to use it to educate people, so they're able to, I guess, defend the symbols that they love, because you don't want to lose them just because some dickhead decided to think he knows what's right. But yeah, I think
something that people have been talking about recently in Canada too, with the recently formed Heathen Confederation of Canada, where part of the reason why this thing is being formed is to try to present a public face to say, this is what inclusive heathenry looks like, and present a media contact, that kind of thing, to say, don't just listen to those people on the far right who are saying crazy things.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of them. Unfortunately, there is a lot of them.
But even more so, there's a lot of coverage.
They capture attention.
Yeah, there's a lot of coverage of them in the media because they're the most quote unquote exciting, also, and the most problematic to So
I think the other thing is it's hard. As I know firsthand, it's hard to to ignore as well sometimes, because I think, as I showed you earlier in the week, Matthias, we get comments on our posts all the time because we use black models, and people don't like the idea of. So some people don't like the idea of like Viking age history or clothing, a black person wearing it. And that's just a sad reality. Some people don't like it. We get comments from calling people monkeys to just to something as putting a banana, or full out just using the N-word. Like, that's just what people do. And our stance is that we just delete it, block, delete, report, and that's it. But it gets to a point where I get fucking frustrated with it and sick of just deleting it, because if nothing happens, Facebook don't do anything. Instagram do not care. I've reported things about other people report it, and then it comes back with a little thing. It doesn't go against our guidelines because nobody really looks at it. It's just a computer that looks at it. And unless maybe they're using a trigger word that picks up, if it's said just like in context of a sentence, it's not going to flag up. So it's just allowed and nothing happens from it. So I had a gentleman who was telling me why don't we use white models? Even though we do, we use all models of different colors. And he was, why have you got a black man wearing like this Nordic design? So because it's 2021 and we want to promote inclusivity, and people can wear what the fuck they want, and we want people to enjoy the culture. So it doesn't matter. And he started talking about mixed breeds and all this bullshit. And I got to the point where I was like, you know what, fuck you, and just posted it on our Instagram to, all if I was to see, and just let people see what this person is. But then equally, I'm almost vying into this publicity for them as well, because you're showing that these people are out there. So I find myself in a catch-22 situation where I want to delete and block and just ignore them, but also it's hard to just ignore because you get sick of it. And and it's nice is people send me a bunch of messages saying, thank you for posting this. It shows a highlight. It's like, well, you shouldn't thank me, because I just read the messages and it doesn't necessarily mean anything to me, apart from I just think you're a fucking asshole for writing it. But it's more the people. I feel sorry for the people who read it, who are mixed race or who are black, who are interested in this culture, read that and then have to read that and see what people think. They're the people who I feel really bad for, because I just read it and delete it because you're just a dick. But there are people who read it who genuinely, you're speaking to them and you're talking about them and their heritage, and it's what do you do about it? Because you can either ignore it or you shame it, but neither seems to work, and both kind of, I guess, have the positive and negative to how you deal with them. But I certainly haven't let it stop bothering me either, because it really does fuck me off when I get idiots like that. But I don't know.
The comment section there, it's like the worst of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely. But it's when, but this was a private message as well. So it's somebody's taken the time, they've seen our choice of model and then taken the time to message and say what they want to say. And I tend to be pretty calm with it and try to point people in the right direction. But I just get to a point where I'm just like, you know what, fuck you. Just because I don't know. I always try to think there's good in people and you can educate people and kind of help. But some people have some thoughts that just I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. But equally, that's why I'm so outspoken about not losing the culture or the things we love to these people, because they don't deserve this. They don't deserve to have the symbols or any part of this, because it's not for them. And there's much better people, and there's a lot more people who don't think like that, but they just don't get listened to, I guess, or they're not the loudest voice. So these people take the headlines, and it's sad, and that's why I guess I'm so against kind of giving any ground at all to them. So
I agree. Fuck them. Fuck those assholes.
Yeah, absolutely. let's wrap it up on that somber note. No, it's that one's been bothering me all week because I send you the message, Matthias. It's just
no, I I agree that it's some horrible bullshit what some of those people are saying, and I am kind of surprised that there is not more of all the policing that Instagram and Facebook and all these platforms tend to do. Why the hell aren't they policing that stuff?
They don't.
Yeah.
So
somebody posts something where you might be able to see a blurred nipple or something like that, and then they get their account banned and all this stuff. But some racist fuckhead out there is talking shit like that, and they don't get banned. Like, absolutely. What is that?
No. Honestly, no
sense.
Like I said, I've reported stuff and it's literally come back saying it doesn't go against our guidelines, and it's just like, well, what's the point? What is the point of me reporting it? Because the other thing is like, you have to leave the message there to be able to report it. So you have, and it's I don't want people seeing that. I hate the fact that when we get a new model, that I have to have this awkward conversation with them about, look, when we post your pictures, it's likely that people are going to post some racist stuff, and we don't stand for it. We'll block and delete it, but be aware that it might happen. I don't want to have that fucking conversation when I choose a model for some clothing in 2021. It's not a nice conversation for anyone, and it just shouldn't be a thing. It shouldn't happen. But I certainly think Facebook and Instagram have a lot to answer for. Because if they were making fucking money off taking those messages down, I guarantee those messages wouldn't be there. But, oh well, that's my rant.
I love that rant. That's a great rant.
I've been waiting all week for that. That fuckhead it pissed me off for a long time. It's just, no. Listen, that's enough. Let's wrap up. Barbara, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for especially for coming in last minute. It's been a wonderful chat. I've really enjoyed it. I think we're at maybe an hour and a half. So time really does fly. Where can people find you, follow you, I guess, find your work? If you want to say, if you don't.
Well, as of now, I have only academic papers in terms of my heathen writings, I guess. But I am in the process of converting my recent dissertation into a book. So eventually people will be able to look for the book. So awesome. I don't know quite yet who is going to publish that work. I'm in conversation with a publisher right now about that.
Good luck with that.
What is the dissertation on?
It's called Wyrd Ecology. The dissertation itself is available from the University of Waterloo on, I think it's called UW Space. So if people really want to read a dissertation, they can find it there. Otherwise, a somewhat more accessible version will be available eventually. I would expect it'll maybe be called something like Heathen Ecology, but that's not going to be entirely under my control, as I'm familiar with from previous publishing experiences that sometimes the publisher likes to choose a title.
Yeah, Norse mythology for children. Hey, Matthias. Remember that one?
Yeah, or the other old Norse something book that I published recently.
No, let us know when it's ready to come out. I guess you can pop back on the show and we'll talk about it and
sounds good.
Have some lovely more rants, I guess. Some more lovely rants.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Matthias, where can people find you?
Thank you.
You can find me on Instagram still for a little while. I don't know if I'm getting too sick of that platform too. But then you won't be able to find me anywhere.
Not from here.
Dun, dun, dun.
Here you can. Find me here.
Oh yeah. You know, weekly rants of the podcast, absolutely.
That's it. That's what we save our monthly episode for.
Yes.
All right. If you want to follow me personally, it's Daniel_Farrand1 on Instagram. Business, obviously, Sons of Odin. Follow the podcast, Not Known Mythology Podcast. If you enjoy the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a positive review. Helps us bump up. I think we're on 4.8 out of 5 now from 260 something reviews. I always check them every day, so write nice things. And then if you really want to help the show, then Patreon's the best way. You can pop on there. We've got a bunch of different tiers. You get no matter what tier you support, you get a bonus episode every week. It's either the Vikings watch along, where me and Matthias sit down and watch an episode of Vikings and let people know our thoughts, which is we're going to do right after this. Or the other one is the story time episode, where Jonas Lorentzen now comes on and narrates a saga, and me and Matthias get to sit back and have a good laugh. And they are good. They are funny. They're honestly worth the subscription to Patreon for anybody's money. They are hilarious. Jonas,
come listen to the Cockney version of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer.
Yeah, I cannot thank you, Jonas, enough for doing those. He goes all out. He's got a character and an accent for every single person in the saga. It really is a good time. So just hop on and check them out. You've got the first 2 episodes are also on the Patreon. You can listen to them, watch them. And if you don't like it, you can always cancel your Patreon, I guess. But I promise you will enjoy it. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara.